A blade falls, a crowd roars, and somewhere in the shadows stands a man whose name alone could empty streets and silence taverns, the executioner. For centuries, these figures haunted the edges of society, cursed to deliver death while the powerful who ordered it slept soundly in their beds. They were the final actors in a brutal theatre of justice, wielding axes and ropes before audiences that numbered in the thousands. Some were skilled, others were nightmares, and a select few became legends, not for mercy, but for the sheer volume of blood on their hands. Jack Ketch, England's notorious headsman of public punishment. In the London of the 1670s, no name carried more dread than Jack Ketch. Appointed as royal executioner around 1663, Ketch quickly established himself not as a master of his craft, but as its most spectacular failure. Where other headsmen prided themselves on swift, clean deaths, Ketch turned the scaffold into a butcher's yard. His first recorded mention comes from court documents dated January 1676, followed by a broadside depicting his execution of Catholic martyr Edward Coleman. By 1681, witnesses described how he hanged Stephen College for half an hour before dismantling him and destroying the remains in a fire. Ketch supplemented his executioner's wages by selling the clothes of the dead and pieces of the hangman's rope, which superstitious Londoners believed held magical properties. Then came the execution that would cement his infamy. On a summer morning in 1683, William Russell, Lord Russell, convicted for his role in the Rye House plot to assassinate King Charles II, knelt before the block. Russell had paid Ketch 10 guineas the night before, the customary bribe for a quick death. What followed was anything but quick. The first blow caught Russell's shoulder. The second missed the mark entirely. The third and fourth struck heavier, but still the task remained unfinished. Ruin stained the scaffold. The crowd, hardened by countless executions, began to murmur in horror. According to some accounts, Russell looked up at his torturer between blows and said, "You dog, did I give you 10 guineas to use me so inhumanely?" It took 4 or 5 strikes before Ketch finally finished the strike. The spectators' outrage grew so intense that Ketch needed a guard to escape. They would have torn him apart. Humiliated, Ketch published a pamphlet titled Apologie, claiming Russell had failed to position himself properly on the block and that the victim's movements had distracted his aim. The excuse convinced no one. 2 years later came an execution even more catastrophic. James Scott, Duke of Monmouth, illegitimate son of Charles II, who had led a failed rebellion, approached the scaffold aware of Ketch's reputation. He allegedly asked for the execution to be completed in one blow. Ketch's response was to deliver somewhere between 5 and 8 strikes, depending on which witness you believe. Some accounts claim Monmouth actually rose from the block between blows, gravely wounded and reeling. The diarist John Evelyn wrote that the execution so incensed the people that had he not been guarded and got away, they would have torn him to pieces. Ketch died in November 1686, barely a year after the Monmouth disaster, but his legacy endured. For the next 2 centuries, every executioner in England was called Jack Ketch. The phrase "to dance with Jack Ketch" became slang for hanging. Even Newgate Prison named the room where they prepared the dismantled remains of traitors Jack Ketch's kitchen. Franz Schmidt, the executioner who recorded 361 death sentences. In a small Bavarian town in the late 16th century, a woodsman named Heinrich Schmidt stood in a crowd watching an execution. He had no way of knowing that the tyrannical Margrave Albrecht II was about to point at him and order him to perform the hanging himself. Refusal meant death. Heinrich complied, and in that moment destroyed his family's honor forever. In medieval Germany, executioners belonged to the dishonorable trades, a status so toxic that their children were banned from schools, their families shunned by churches, and their very touch considered contaminating. Heinrich's son, Franz, inherited not just the profession in 1573 at age 18, but the crushing weight of social exile. What made Franz Schmidt different was his obsessive need to document everything. The first entry in his journal reads, June 5, 1573. Leonard Ross of Zion, a thief, executed with the rope at the city of Steinach, was my first execution. Over the next 45 years, Schmidt would fill page after page with meticulous records, 361 executions and 345 lesser punishments, including floggings and the removal of fingers and ears. Each entry noted the date, location, method, crime, and often disturbing details about the condemned. In October 1589, he recorded a man who shot his father. On this account, he was led out in a wagon here, his frame marked thrice with red-hot irons, afterwards executed with the wheel, 2 of his limbs first broken upon it, and finally exposed on it. Schmidt's prose remained clinical, avoiding the sensationalism of popular crime literature. He rarely used words like dreadful or pitiful, presenting each death as a bureaucratic necessity rather than theatre. One entry stands out for its macabre detail. In 1602, Schmidt beheaded Georg Praun, a cook convicted of theft. After placing the fallen visage on a stone, Schmidt noted something unsettling. His head turned several times, as if it wanted to look about it, for a good quarter of an hour. Whether this was post-mortem muscle spasm or something more disturbing, Schmidt recorded it without judgment. But Schmidt was more than an executioner. During downtime between executions, he worked as a healer, consulting with an estimated 15,000 patients over his career. This side profession speaks to a fascinating paradox. A man who killed for the state also saved lives through medical knowledge. His employer, the city of Nuremberg, eventually recognized this duality. Schmidt's true purpose in keeping the journal became clear when he retired in 1617. He submitted it as evidence in a formal petition to Emperor Matthias, asking that his family's lost honor be restored. The emperor agreed. Schmidt became a citizen of Nuremberg, granted the right to wear a sword and have his children attend respectable schools. When he died in 1634, he received a lavish funeral and was buried in one of Nuremberg's prominent cemeteries, honors unthinkable for most executioners. Charles-Henri Sanson, the royal executioner who served French kings. Charles-Henri Sanson never wanted to wield the blade. Born in 1739 into a family that had served as executioners for 4 generations, he dreamed of studying medicine and escaping the profession that had cursed his bloodline. When a convent school in Rouen discovered his father's occupation, young Charles-Henri was expelled to protect the institution's reputation. That rejection sealed his fate. At 15, his father suffered a paralyzing stroke. Charles-Henri, the eldest son, was immediately appointed deputy executioner. Within years, he assumed full responsibility for carrying out death sentences in Paris. Well-educated, musically talented, and counted among the well-dressed members of Parisian society, Sanson cut an unusual figure for his profession. He played violin and cello, composed music with his friend Tobias Schmidt, a German harpsichord maker, and moved in circles that would have shunned him had they known his family history. When the revolution erupted in 1789, Sanson found himself at the center of a debate about execution methods. The old ways, beheading by sword or hanging, required tremendous skill and physical stamina. Sanson himself had once unintentionally tortured a victim by failing to finish the act in a single stroke, a memory that haunted him. With the revolution demanding equality in death, Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotin proposed a mechanical solution. Sanson became instrumental in developing the guillotine, working alongside Guillotin and the royal surgeon Dr. Antoine Louis. His friend Tobias Schmidt built the final prototype. According to one account, King Louis XVI, then under house arrest and mechanically minded, examined the plans and suggested changing the blade from a flat cleaver to an angled edge for better weight distribution. The king was unknowingly perfecting the device that would kill him. On April 17, 1792, Sanson led the first test of the guillotine at Bicêtre Hospital. Straw bales fell to the blade, then sheep. Finally, human corpses. The machine passed every trial. Within days, Sanson inaugurated its use by executing Nicolas Jacques Pelletier for robbery and assault. The guillotine transformed Sanson's status overnight, from social outcast to equal citizen under revolutionary ideology. Then came the morning of January 21, 1793. According to some accounts, a threatening message had warned Sanson that a plot to rescue the king was in motion. Whether true or fabricated, no rescue came. Louis XVI arrived at the Place de la Révolution in his own carriage, hands still unbound. When Sanson's assistants moved to tie his wrists with rope, the king recoiled. He would not be treated like a common criminal. Sanson offered an alternative. A handkerchief, sire. That small gesture of respect broke the tension. Louis allowed himself to be bound with his own handkerchief. His hair was cut, his collar opened. He climbed the scaffold and attempted to address the crowd, proclaiming his innocence. A drum roll drowned out his words. At 10:22 a.m., the blade fell. One assistant later claimed the cut wasn't clean, that Sanson had to apply pressure to complete the procedure. Whether true or not, the head was raised before a roaring crowd. Sanson executed Charlotte Corday that summer, the assassin of Jean-Paul Marat. When a carpenter named Legros grabbed her fallen head from the basket and struck it, witnesses claimed her face showed unequivocal indignation. Sanson complained bitterly. Legros was imprisoned for the offense. The executioner took pride in treating the dead with dignity, even in death. The reign of terror that followed consumed thousands. Sanson's diary records 2,548 executions between July 1789 and October 1796. Among the victims, Georges Danton, Maximilien Robespierre, and countless others who had once wielded revolutionary power. By the time Sanson retired in 1795, broken in health and haunted by memories, he had personally dispatched nearly 3,000 souls. He died in 1806, leaving the family profession to his son. Giovanni Battista Bugatti, the papal executioner of 500-plus sentences. In 1796, a 17-year-old from the coastal town of Senigallia took a position that would define the next 7 decades of his life. Giovanni Battista Bugatti became the official executioner for the Papal States, a role he would hold longer than any man before or since. Over 68 years, Bugatti would carry out 516 executions, his scarlet cape becoming one of Rome's most feared sights. The Romans gave him a nickname, Mastro Titta, a corruption of Maestro di Giustizia, Master of Justice. The name became synonymous with death itself. Parents used it to frighten disobedient children. When Romans saw Bugatti crossing the Ponte Sant'Angelo in his distinctive red cloak, they knew an execution was scheduled and would rush indoors or gather in the piazzas. Bugatti wasn't permitted to cross the Tiber River into central Rome, except for official business. He lived in the Borgo district near the Vatican, running a shop that sold painted umbrellas and souvenirs, an incongruous day job for a man who ended lives for the Pope. His first execution took place on March 22, 1796, when he travelled to Foligno to hang and quarter Nicola Gentilucci, convicted of killing a priest and coachman. Papal law paid executioners a mere 3 cents of the Roman lira per execution, deliberately marking the vileness of his work. But Bugatti received free lodging, tax concessions, and eventually a substantial pension. More importantly, he took pride in his skill. Before each execution, he would offer the condemned a pinch of snuff, a small gesture of humanity before delivering death. Bugatti meticulously recorded each execution in his ledger, now preserved in Rome's historical archive. The methods varied by crime and period. Before 1816, he used the axe and noose. After the French occupation introduced the guillotine, it became the standard. But for crimes deemed especially loathsome, Bugatti employed two other techniques. The mazzello involved a large mallet swung through the air to gather momentum before crashing down on the prisoner's crown, followed by ending their breath. Drawing and quartering, sometimes after hanging, awaited those whose crimes horrified even hardened Romans. One thief who stole sacred vessels was hanged, divided, dispatched, and then had his body burned. Public executions in Rome were spectacular events. Piazza del Popolo, the Circus Maximus, Campo dei Fiori. These famous landmarks became stages for Bugatti's work. Crowds filled the squares. Fathers brought their sons to witness the moment of death, delivering a slap to the boy's face as the head fell or the condemned drew their last breath. A warning never forgotten. Both Lord Byron and Charles Dickens witnessed Bugatti at work during visits to Rome. Byron saw a triple beheading in Piazza del Popolo in 1817, describing the experience in letters to his publisher. Dickens watched an execution in Via dei Cerchi in 1845, later writing about it in Pictures from Italy as an ugly, filthy, careless, sickening spectacle. Still, he noted Bugatti's efficiency and precision. Bugatti served through the Napoleonic occupation, the restoration of papal rule, and the upheavals of the Italian Risorgimento. He executed under 6 different popes, adapting to political winds while maintaining his grim duty. Even into old age, his hand remained steady, his strikes precise. On August 17, 1864, at age 85, he performed his final execution, the beheading of Domenico Antonio de Martini for murder. Pope Pius IX granted him a pension of 30 scudi per month. Bugatti retired to a quiet life, his ledger complete. The final entry in his record reads, "So ends the long list of Bugatti. May that of his successor be shorter." He died 5 years later in 1869. His scarlet cloak, axes, and the unique papal guillotine with its straight blade and V-shaped neckpiece are displayed today in Rome's Museum of Criminology. These 4 men, Ketch the incompetent, Schmidt the meticulous, Sanson the reluctant, and Bugatti the enduring, represent different faces of the same dark profession. They wielded power that terrified millions, yet remained outcasts in the societies they served. Their names echo through centuries, not as heroes or villains, but as reminders of an age when justice was public, brutal, and inescapable. If you had lived in their time and witnessed one of these executions, would you have looked away or watched until the end? The scaffold may be gone, but the shadows of these executioners still linger in the stones of London, Nuremberg, Paris, and Rome.
In the cities and towns of medieval Europe, justice wasn't something hidden behind prison walls. It was public, it was harsh, and it was a spectacle. In the center of the town square, before a crowd of hundreds, sometimes thousands, stood a figure who was both feared and essential. The executioner. This was the person who turned a death sentence into a chilling reality. For most medieval people, the executioner was a mysterious, almost mythical figure. Children were warned about him. Criminals trembled at his name, and ordinary citizens would cross the street to avoid him. Yet, despite this universal dread, governments saw him as absolutely necessary. The prevailing belief was that harsh, public punishments were the most effective way to deter crime. If people saw the brutal fate of a thief or a traitor, they'd think twice before breaking the law themselves. These public executions became powerful displays of authority. The event was announced days in advance, and word would spread like wildfire. By the day of the execution, a massive crowd would have gathered. It was a grim affair, but it also had a strange, festival-like atmosphere. Vendors might set up stalls selling food and goods, turning a moment of death into a bizarre public gathering. But while the crowd watched with morbid curiosity, The executioner carried a heavy burden. He was the one who had to end a human life, and this role placed him in a uniquely strange position in society. On one hand, he was an agent of the state, working for kings and city councils. On the other, he was treated like an outcast. Most people believed that a person who dealt with death was somehow unclean or morally tainted. Because of this stigma, executioners and their families were often forced to live on the very fringes of town. They were social pariahs, rarely invited to gatherings. People would refuse to shake their hand or share a meal with them. Their children were often bullied and rejected, making it nearly impossible to break free from the family trade. In many cities, the role of executioner became a grim inheritance, passed down from father to son. It wasn't a job anyone wanted, but for these families, there was often no other choice. Once your family name was associated with the gallows, other professions would shut their doors to you. Marriage prospects were slim, limited to other outcast families. This social isolation meant the profession was often trapped within a single bloodline for generations. So, how did one even become an executioner? Sometimes, the role was offered to a condemned criminal. Imagine facing your own death sentence, only to be given a strange choice: die, or become the city's next executioner. It was a way to save your own life, but it condemned you to a lifetime of performing the very act you had just escaped. More commonly, they were trained from a young age. A boy would grow up watching his father maintain the tools of the trade, sharpening swords, checking ropes, and studying the grim anatomy of his work. The job required a surprising amount of skill. A bungled execution could cause unimaginable suffering and infuriate the watching crowd, sometimes even sparking a riot. An experienced executioner took a kind of professional pride in his efficiency. His sword for beheadings had to be razor sharp. The ropes for hanging needed to be strong and precisely measured. Every method demanded knowledge, practice, and a steady hand. But this expertise earned him no respect. He was paid by the state, but shunned by the people. To make ends meet, some executioners took on other undesirable tasks. Since they were already associated with death, they were often called upon to do jobs no one else would touch. This could include clearing animal carcasses from the streets, handling bodies during plague outbreaks, or even acting as unofficial surgeons for certain procedures, since their work gave them a practical, if gruesome, understanding of the human body. This strange mix of roles only added to their bizarre status. They were essential for the functioning of medieval society, yet they were never truly part of it. Their homes were often located near the city walls or next to the prisons, a constant reminder of their proximity to suffering and death. It was a dark reputation that clung to them and their families, a shadow they could never escape. They were the lonely, necessary monsters of the medieval world, living and dying on the edge of a society that both needed and despised them. Thanks for watching, and if you found this interesting, be sure to follow for more stories from the past.